My name is Roger Koopman. It's a good old German name, Koopman. And when I finally graduated school and went into the service, I kind of liked planes in the military. But when I got out, it's when I really started getting into the RC part of it, the radio control part of it. And I did that for several years, so I kind of know the basics of flying a plane. Then the ultralight came along in about the 80s, and it started coming a little bit, got a little interested in that. My son was getting old enough that he was starting to get a little interested in it too, so he actually bought a kit because the ultralight thing was coming up it was an experimental category when we first started out, general aviation, and you built everything from plans. Well, when the ultralight thing come around, you could buy a kit, and there were several manufacturers out there, and then put your kit together. Well, that's what he did. He bought a real cheap one, about $3,000, and put it together, and he flew it because you could teach yourself to fly. You didn't have to have a license. And then I kind of got interested in it from there. But he went on becoming an aviation regular pilot and stuff. In fact, he's a mechanic right now. And then about 1995, this plane came on the market. It actually started life as an instructor plane because two places were not legal ultralight planes. That was in 1990. It was built, and I acquired it in 1995. I went through it, repainted it, and refurbished it a little bit. And I've had it ever since 1995, put different engines and stuff on it.
Mary Yeoman, Y-E-O-M-A-N. Dave and I both grew up at Algona, Iowa. I went to school at a small town north of there, and he grew up and went to school in Algona, so we didn't meet until high school years. And but he would tell me many stories about him as he was a young boy. He always loved airplanes, and he had an interest at a young age. One day on his Wheaties box, he saw an advertisement saying, you can send in 10 cents and get a model airplane that really flies. And he was so excited, so he saved his 10 cents that week and sent for this little model kit, which he was waiting for. And when it came, it was a cardboard cutout of an airplane and a rubber band. He was so disappointed. But he often would save his money and buy a kit and put together airplane kits as a young boy. And when he was a little older, maybe junior high age, he had a Whizz Air motorbike, and he rode all over town, and he would often end up at the airport because he knew one of the men out there who was a pilot and flew. And he thought, if I go out there when he's there, maybe I can get a ride in his airplane. And he just had an interest in airplanes ever since he was young. After we were married, we lived in Walker, and I was teaching, and Dave was at Collins Radio, and he decided he wanted to take flying lessons. And I said, well, if you really want to, we have 2 incomes, we have no children, so we probably have more money now than we'll ever have, so go take your flying lessons. So he did that, and then he met other interested people in flying, and he joined a flying club in Cedar Rapids. And he went with 2 other men, and the 3 of them together bought a Luscombe, which is a little 2-seater airplane, held 2 people. And it was stationed it was hangared at McBride Airport down on C Avenue. And they took turns. They scheduled when they wanted to fly, and if they wanted to take it for a weekend, they would say, it's mine for that weekend. Is that okay? They got along well, and eventually one of the men moved away, and so they bought his share of the airplane. And then it wasn't long before, and the other partner of the airplane decided he didn't fly that much and he needed his money to help buy a house, so he sold out his half, and Dave ended up owning the whole airplane.
David Yeoman, Y-E-O-M-A-N, and I'm Mary's son, Dave's son. But I started flying, I think, when I was 18, Then I finished when I was 19. I joined a club down between Cedar Rapids and Iowa City, and they had 3 or 4 different airplanes. I ultimately bought into a partnership with one of the club members, and then ultimately wanted my own airplane. And then as you get more kids, you get bigger airplanes. And so I think I've owned 5 airplanes over the course of my life. And I now have these 2, a 1952 Cessna 195 and a 1940 Piper Cub. And I mentioned earlier that I like old airplanes. And I think the reason why is Mom had mentioned Dad was on the board of directors for the Experimental Aircraft Association. And so he used to go to the board meetings in Wisconsin, and he would take me along when I was a child. And while he was in the board meetings, I would go roam around the museum and look at all the old airplanes in the museum, and I got an affection for old airplanes. So now when it was time for me to buy airplanes, I wanted to fly the same airplanes I saw in the museum. So that's kind of my specialty, is older airplanes.
My name is Todd Less, Toddloes. I got involved in aviation in 1991, and the reason at the time was I had a sales job, and they provided a company car. And I still had a personal car, but I didn't really need 2 regular cars. So I thought, oh hey, I'll sell one, and then I'll get one. I'll sell my personal car. I'll buy something fun, a Sunbeam Tiger or a Jensen Healy, or something real cute and zippy. And then I had a friend say, well, yeah, but it doesn't really do anything that the company car does. Maybe you should go take an introductory flight lesson and do something completely different. So I think it was at the time, in 1991, you could take an introductory lesson for about $40. And they'd get you in the left seat of the airplane, they'd take off, they'd hand you the controls, and you got to maneuver around. And at the end of that, you kind of had a pretty good idea if it was something you were interested in or not. And I got back on the ground and I signed up for 3 lessons a week.
My name is Susan Stamates, SUSAN I'm originally from Andrew, Iowa. Started way back in 1976, the first time I saw a hot air balloon. I had been living in the DC, Alexandria, Virginia area. I'd been working there. Then I moved back to Iowa, and I saw a hot air balloon land actually in a street in Cedar Rapids up against a building. And then later, probably like 6 months later, I saw this balloon land out in a field, and my little nephew was with me, and we were keeping our distance, and the pilot kept motioning us to come over to him. And we did, and then I met this pilot. I was actually working for the company. His company, which is not a balloon company, but it was a communications company. I was working there, and he had been on vacation, so I hadn't met him yet. He was the boss. And then I started crewing for him, and then later he taught me how to fly, and later we got married.
Adam Elkin, Adamelkin. When I turned 19, my grandma got me a tandem for my birthday, and I got down and was hooked. So my best friend and I, we spent every dime we had over the next couple of years just jumping, eventually becoming an instructor, and now 11 years and 5,000 jumps later, here we are.
Yeah, my name's Casey Boyd. I'm the owner of Skydive Iowa. It's a passion for most people that start skydiving. It's definitely a unique job skill, but once you get into it, there's nothing else like it. So just running skydivers, owning a drop zone is a dream of mine, and I'm living it, so it's a lot of fun. I did a tandem just like pretty much everybody else, and once you do it, you'll know right away whether it's something that you want to continue doing or if it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
Well, I've always enjoyed flying, especially when you get up in the air by yourself. You're kind of, I like to be by myself occasionally, but it's just kind of neat to be up in the air. You get up, you can see, and there's always that little adventure that happens once in a while. You might be flying along, and all of a sudden a dog and updraft will hit you and knock you around a little bit, so it kind of gets your attention again. So you're always a little cautious. It's got to be, and it's just, I just always have liked flying. I've given rides before, and I'd never have anybody say they didn't like it. I've always said, I've got 2 signals that you give me when I get in the air. It's either thumbs up or thumbs down. And when you give me thumbs down, I get in the air on the ground as fast as possible. And I never had anybody actually not want to get right back on the ground. And it's always gone up. The only thing they do complain about is they're very noisy.
He flew a lot. When the weather was nice, he'd come in the house for work, say, okay, I'm going to fly, and then he'd go out and fly, and he said, that's how I can relax. I like to just check on the neighborhood, he said. He would only maybe fly 15, 20 minutes, but or maybe half hour, depends on the weather and what else was going on. But he enjoyed flying, and he flew that quite a bit. One time he flew it to Oklahoma, and one time he flew it to the eastern side of Michigan. And I knew the day he was coming home from Michigan, and he landed about dusk, because that airplane didn't have lights. And he said, oh, I am so cold, I'm so cold, because it's all open. There's no windows, no way to heat it. So, but anyway, he enjoyed it.
Yeah, have always been around aviation. Took it for granted. You know, we would fly to my grandma's house like you would drive to your grandma's house, but I would get airsick. I didn't like the turbulence. I didn't mind flying, but I anytime it got bumpy, I would get airsick. And so I would always have my sick sack with me, and halfway to grandma's, I'd usually get sick, and then I'd feel better. And so I liked airplanes and I liked aviation, but I didn't like flying. And I could see an airplane fly over and tell you what kind it was, but I had no interest in flying myself. And one day I decided I was a teenager, I think, and I decided that was kind of an odd practice, to love airplanes but not want to fly. So I had my dad give me just a few lessons, and then we got hooked up with a flight instructor, and I earned my license, and ultimately became a pilot, and have been flying ever since, and have not gotten sick ever since. You know, they say that once you fly, you're always looking to the sky, and if I walk by a window at work, I just instinctively look up to kind of see what's the wind, what's the weather, would this be a good day to fly, right? Because you're always thinking about when's the next time I get to fly. And my wife knows, she's like my mom. She doesn't really like to fly, but she knows I do. So she's very supportive of it. And when I say, hey, it's going to be good weather tomorrow, she knows I'm going to go flying. So yeah, I look forward to it all the time, and it's something I like to do by myself a lot. I have a 5-place airplane, but I have a little 2-place airplane, but most of the time I like to do it by myself. It is my way of relaxing. It's my way to just kind of be away from everything that's going on Earth, if you will, and kind of be in your own space. And I find it very, very calming and very refreshing.
Oh, I can't give it up. I get grumpy when I don't fly. Some people get grumpy when they don't have their girlfriend around or something like that. Well, I get grumpy when I don't fly. There's just a bit of a stimulus need, if you want to call it that, right? We have a drive for thirst, a drive for food, a drive for many things, and then we have stimulus needs. Well, I'm not very stimulated unless I can fly once in a while, or at least have the promise that I'm going to fly. If I thought my medical certificate wasn't going to get renewed, or that my eyesight wasn't good enough or something like that anymore, it would be a pretty tough blow to me. We're all in charge of our own happiness, and we have to find a way to work around these things. But right now, flying makes me pretty happy.
It's a passion. There's an incredible peacefulness. I can have a real stressful day, and if I go out and fly, it just changes my whole attitude, and I think that's part of it. It's the beauty that you see, and the peacefulness and quietness. I've been flying in Cedar Rapids. I got my license in 1984, and I've been flying over this countryside for many, many, many years. I also have flown all over the United States, and I've flown in 6, 7 different countries, but this is just gorgeous. Iowa doesn't have any real dramatic landscapes or anything, but there's such a subtle peace and grace and beauty to the land. It's really lovely.
It's just fun. I can't imagine life not doing this or not having it part of my life. You see people come and go, and they just lose interest in the sport, but I don't see that ever happening for me. I may slow down at times and I may pick it back up and jump harder, but even after stepping down as a competitive skydiver from 1,300 jumps a year to 200 jumps a year, I still love every moment of it, and I don't see that changing.
Oh, for skydiving, skydiving is the biggest, I'd say, community in a sport. You know, you become family. It almost sucks you in more and more just because of the camaraderie of skydiving. So it's definitely gotten more of a passion of mine, let alone the family.
Oh yeah, like when you first start out, that first time you separate the plane from the earth, you kind of go, oh, I don't know if I like this or not, but then you kind of settle into it. And like I say, I taught myself how to fly, so not a good instructor. But yeah, there's always a fear factor, because there's always something that's going to get your attention to the doggone thing. There's always that thought of what if. The wing is not going to break. I mean, structurally wise, these planes are really good and strong anymore. But there's always just that unexpected thing that could happen. But I don't think the fear factor is as strong as it used to be. Now you pretty much settle back and just kind of accept what's going on.
One of the memories I have of my dad, one of the times he was flying here, he came over the power lines and cut the power and had landed a little hard. There was a turbulence right at the end that kind of banged, and he bent his landing gear. So he had taken the airplane in the shed and was propped it up and was working the landing gear, and in the process broke one of the ribs in the wing, so he had to fix the ribs. So it took about a year to fix it all. And then he was out test flying it the next spring, and he landed, and the tail wheel broke and fell off the spring, and so he couldn't steer the airplane, and so it went over into the bean field and flipped upside down. And I was probably 14 at the time, and so I was worried about him, and I came running over, and all he would say was, "I'm okay. Don't step on the wing. Don't break him. Don't hurt the airplane." So the airplane meant a lot to him, and he fixed it up and got it going again, and flew it many more years.
My worst moments happen when my kids are in the airplane with me. You know, if you think you've made a mistake and you know your kids are on board, that can be a real gut-pulling adventure. And it's happened. It's happened. I landed on the trip to San Diego, 8 hours down the way. I wasn't thinking straight, and I landed on the wrong runway. And I had a tailwind, and the wind and the rain was coming over the mountains, and I had to get it on the ground. And I realized before I landed that, hey, this isn't going the way you thought it would, but I pulled it together, realized, hey, I've got a tailwind, and I didn't want a tailwind. But I had enough runway that I knew I could make that work out okay. But, at the end of the day, I thought, you need to stay sharper than this. You've pushed yourself a little too far today. And so a lot of times when they say, oh yeah, you need somebody with experience, what you really mean is you're looking for somebody who's made a few mistakes and won't make them again. A lot of times we're thinking about where we're going to put the airplane if something goes bad. And you can get yourself into a situation where you realize, I don't have a good out in the situation. And you can actually allow your mind to start making problems that don't exist. And there's a story about people who fly over the Great Lakes, that once you're out over in the middle of the lake, the engine always sounds rough. Things like that happen. But it's important before you fly to assess the airplane and make sure the airplane itself doesn't have something wrong. And it's important during the flight to assess the risk and the risk of continuing if you don't address it. So if you think the engine isn't running right, you can turn around and go find some place to land, even though it wasn't your destination.
The first thing I would do is don't panic. And you have to remain calm, and there's a lot of things that you've been trained. For example, one of the big things is power lines. And one of your initial reaction would be, okay, I've got power lines. I'm going to burn, and think you can fly over them, but you can't usually, because what happens is when you hit the burner, it takes a while for that heat to get up in the envelope and mix with the air and give you lift. And so what you're trained to do is pull the red line, which is attached to a parachute top, and then you'll drop down. I mean, you might get hurt, you might break a leg or something, but you're not going to be running into power lines. I was up in Battle Creek, Michigan at a competition, and I ended up landing in a swamp. I was becalmed over a lake, and I had no place to land. And I even had my crew try and go to the houses and see if they could get a boat so that they could pull me ashore, but nobody was home. And I meandered along this lake, and then I was over this densely wooded area. And we carry a 150-foot drop line, and it was getting close to sunset, and we have to be down at sunset. And so I decided I would wrap this drop line around me and attach it to the basket in case I had to go into a tree. Well, fortunately, the balloon started backing up and there was a swamp, and I landed in the swamp. And I had to walk through the swamp in the dark. And I found a deer path, and I walked in the deer path and I had to cross a creek. And then I saw above a berm there was a light. And I knew there were houses there, and so I climbed up and, found the people, and, my balloon was rescued the next day.
Yeah, it was just kind of an average childhood. My dad worked at Rath. We were just the other side of the track family. We kind of a poor family. I mean, he didn't make a lot of money. I had three sisters, and I was kind of in the middle. And then finished high school. Out of high school, I went into the service. Come out of the service and got married, and had 2 kids, a girl and a boy, and one's 50, one's 52. So I'm getting a little long in the tooth myself here, but
Yeah, well, I have 2 sisters, one older, one younger. Neither of them fly, although one has an interest in aviation and would like to fly someday. I have 2 daughters, and they grew up flying as well, and so one of the things I would like to do with them when they were young was at airports around Iowa, around every state, during the summer, almost every weekend, some airport has a pancake breakfast. And so we would get up, and we would, on Sunday mornings in the summer, you'd jump in the airplane, and I remember taking my first daughter's car seat when she was 18 months old, and strapping it into my little 2-place airplane, and she and I would fly off and go to a flight breakfast and have pancakes. And so they grew up really enjoying that and anticipating that, and they would go, one of them would go with me most weekends, and then when we got a bigger airplane, they would both go. They both enjoy flying. I think they both, at least one of them has talked about getting her pilot's license. They both may, or neither may, just depends. Life, has a way of changing over time, but it's as much a part of their life. And we grew up, Mom had said she had been to Oshkosh 55 times. I think this year will be my 51st year at Oshkosh. And so I was going since I was 2. Both my girls have been going since they were 6 months old. So if they keep the streak up, they will probably go longer than I go.
After what I learned in the MBA program, that perhaps the place I was working wasn't going to be sustainable. So I took a different job out in Ohio. And by the way, at the same time, I had my first child. So I did very stressful things all simultaneously. I finished a degree, quit my job, had a child, bought a new car, and moved to Ohio, all in, I think, a 3-week period. And so not much got done while I was in Ohio. I was only there for a year. And then moved back here, started a new job, got a new house, got a little bit done, and then sooner or later, child number 2 is on the way. And if you don't know how to prioritize around your family over your projects, you're not doing it right.
Because I do commercial rides, and you're dictated by the wind. You can't just decide I'm going to go out and fly. And so I have all these rides scheduled, and so when the weather is good, I feel obligated to care for my passengers. So it prevents me from doing a lot of social stuff, but the rewards are also worth it.
I was recruited to compete at a professional level a couple years ago, and for 2 years some of my closest friends and I jumped out of planes like hundreds of times a month, and it was an incredible couple of years of traveling and jumping and progressing in something that I really enjoy doing. So that culmination was definitely an incredible experience. I also met my wife skydiving about 3.5 years ago, and just getting to continue to grow with her and see both of us progress in the sport, but also in our now marriage is pretty special. So.
Well, I'm slowing down now quite a bit, but like I say, I've got it to my son, so he's going to have it for a while. So it'll be there whenever I want to fly, but as long as I'm physically able to do it, because flying's not really that hard. It's not much different than driving a car, except you got that third little plane you got to worry about. You can go right and left, but up and down, you know, it's a little different again.
After a while, he couldn't fly any longer, and I said, "What should I do with a scooter?" And he says, "I don't know. It could probably go to a museum, because there's no other planes like it around." And then David, my son, was at the airport, and he overheard him talking about they needed an airplane, a small airplane. And he says, "Oh, I might have something for you." So I donated it to the airport, and they own it. But I also signed a paper that no one could fly it again.
I've flown my 195. I've flown to Texas. I've flown to Kansas. I've flown other planes to Michigan. I was trying to think of Atlanta area. So I've used mine to travel a little bit more than maybe my dad did, other than just going to my grandma's and back. You know, and I certainly intend to fly as long as I am physically able and, you know, mentally able to, and be safe and sharp. So hopefully, I think my dad flew till he was, you know, in his early 70s. I know people who have flown into their early 80s. So as long as I'm able to fly, you know, climb in an airplane and fly it safely, I intend to fly it safely. It'll probably always be a hobby for me. I don't see it becoming a career.
A lot of people build an experimental and they really never go anywhere, which is fine. You know, there's all types of flying for all kinds of people. But I've flown, I had a Piper Tri-Pacer that I flew to Jekyll Island, Georgia, and out over the Atlantic Ocean, and flew it to Pensacola and out over the Gulf, and flew that same plane to San Diego and to Glacier National Park. And I've had the same kind of trips in the Cessna that I have right now. We flew up the Hudson River along the island of Manhattan through the skyline. And so there's really, really neat things I've done flying, and I want to do some of those again in this and say, I flew over the Rockies in an airplane I built. I flew over the Atlantic Ocean in an airplane I built. And I took that same airplane over the Pacific Ocean.
So one of my main objects is to get some of my crew so they get their commercial license. The contract I have with the bank that I fly with is for 2 more years, and then I know they'll want to renew it. I want these guys to take that over so that I can pick and choose when I want to fly. And I also had a brand new balloon built this year for me for fun. It has a dog on one side, a golden retriever, a cat on the other, the sun on one side and the moon and the stars on the other, and I want to just go out and fly. So if I can get these guys trained and they can get their commercial license and have enough hours, they can finish the contract that I have with the bank. Yeah, you know, I usually travel a lot, but I haven't been able to this year. And I'd like to go to Machu Picchu. I haven't been to Greece either. And there's a couple places like that. You know, I've been to Bhutan and Nepal and Mongolia and China and, you know, all kinds of, lots of Africa, like 6 or 7 different places. And in fact, we flew balloons in Africa.
I want to be jumping when I am in my 80s. I want to be jumping until I can't walk anymore. I would love to take my children skydiving. I want to continue taking friends skydiving and family skydiving.
You know, I am so content with skydiving that I don't think I'll really ever get bored with it. So I see myself skydiving until I physically can't anymore. There's not much more that I really need to, you know, gain, I guess, as far as skydiving. I'm right where I like to be, and I got a lot of my friends that are here with me to do a lot of the instructional jumps. So right now, I just love being part of it.
Well, I'll tell you what, people who fly love nothing more than to share it with other people. So if somebody wants to fly, has interest in flying, find a pilot and ask. And they'll talk to your arm off about it. They'll give you a ride. You know, we love nothing more than introducing other people to aviation and seeing somebody, you know, go through those steps and become a pilot themselves.
I would like everybody to take a hot air balloon ride because, you know, you're looking at the world from a different perspective. And it's such a gentle experience and such a peaceful experience that I would like everybody in the whole world to take a ride.
You know, I'm not the best skydiver there ever was, and I never will be, and that's fine, but I do it as safely as I can, and I have a lot of fun doing it. I've made a lot of great friends in the sport, and I know that that will continue. So I hope that, again, I'm jumping when I'm really old so that I can see my legacy.
About skydiving, I just want skydiving people to experience it. You know, it's like I said, it's not a financial moneymaker, but the experience that you get to share with people, it's bonding, right? When you take somebody skydiving, you create a bond with that person. And it kind of goes a little farther than just when they leave here, it's over. You know, they trust you, they get a lot of respect for you, and that's gratifying in itself.